Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff here on www.shawnriffraff.com, where I've been doing a lot of things here recently, and just it's been a lot of work, a lot of things going on, and I'm happy about how everything is going. I'm excited, but I gotta tell a story. Before we get started with what we're doing tonight, which is going to be extraordinarily interesting. So I hope everybody stays the entire time, but it's going to be really interesting, some really empowering, some good conversation with a good friend of mine here. But I gotta tell a story about what it means about what it means to be covered. I recently this week, actually it was last Thursday. I was, anyone who knows me knows that I have this proclivity of running and not doing average everyday stuff. So I think real, everything is a whole bunch of stuff going on in my head. I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about what I want to do. I'm thinking about my day ahead of me. I'm thinking about there are some times where I do this and I don't stop and do average everyday stuff. So the day was Thursday. Last Thursday that just passed, and I'm getting up. I've got a meeting at 8:00 in the morning. No, 7:30. 7:30. I got a meeting at 7:30 in the morning. I'm running late, not paying attention. Hop in the car, and I head to the office. I got to get into this meeting on time, right? And not paying attention that I had no gas in my car. So I'm headed to the office, bang, pulled up to the office. Now, I work in the middle of D.C., so my office is right in the middle of D.C., downtown D.C. So, I pull up to the office, boom. I work right almost smack dab at the African American Museum, almost there. So, pull up, bang, park, run in, I make my meeting. I get there by 7:30. I make my meeting. Meeting goes good. Get out of the meeting. And I'm leaving the office probably 12? 12. I think it's 12 noon. So I leave the office. I head towards, I head back here, and on my way there, I realized this car has no gas. And it has no gas to the point where it's not telling me the mileage anymore. Because, it'll say such and such miles to empty. But it does not telling me the mileage anymore. So I'm like, I'm downtown D.C. I don't even know where a gas station is because there's no gas stations downtown D.C. Nowhere. Right? So I'm downtown D.C. I have no idea where the gas station is. So I started driving to where I think the nearest gas station is the Air Force Base. So I'm driving that direction. And I can get on the Air Force Base. So I'm driving that direction. And I'm like, and this car starts, feeling a little stuttering, right? So I get to the Air Force, I get to the Air Force Base, bam, go to the joint, to park the car, go into the joint. So I'm walking around there. I'm walking around, and I'm about to pay for gas or whatever, and not realizing that even though the app says the nearest gas station is the Air Force Base, and I have access to get onto the Air Force Base, right? So I'm good. However, I can get on the Air Force Base, and I can get to the Air Force Base, and I'm good, but I can't buy on the Air Force Base because I'm not military. And so now I can't buy from the gas station that's on the Air Force Base. And so I'm trying to figure out my life at this point. So I'm like, I'm going to have to, leave here, pull out here, stop for a second, maybe I don't know. So I pull out my app because I just know this car is going to break down at this point. So I pull out my insurance app because we're going to have to figure this thing out. Right? So I'm sitting on the Air Force Base with my insurance app, about to have them come bring the gas to me. And this guy, this middle-aged white guy. No, I'm not middle-aged. He's probably mid-50s, early 60s. He looked like Tom Arnold, That's how he looked like Tom Arnold. And, he walks up to me, we start talking or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just trying to figure my life out right now with the gas and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, you need somebody, you just need somebody to sponsor you. That's no problem, right? So he goes in the joint and he's like, well, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'm a go ahead and pay for your gas for you. I'm like, oh, okay. And he hands me his card. And he's like, so, here, whenever, just send me a check. Oh. Okay, now realize this. He wasn't doing me any, it's not like he felt bad for me or anything like that. Because it's not like I couldn't afford the gas. He wasn't like, out of the just being like, it wasn't charity, right? But he pays for it, right? So we get to talking. We get to talking about life, and we get to talking about just life and relationships and marriage and just everything. Me and this guy, you would think me and this guy just grew up together or something, right? And so at the end of the conversation, I ended up in his car. At the end of the conversation, he's like, you know what? Don't even worry about that. Just take this as a wedding gift. Take that as a wedding gift. And I'm like, why? He was like, and I want you to send me the invitation to your wedding, and I want you, because just remember that your angel came and took care of you. So send me an invitation to your wedding, and I might take care of you some more. And so that is, and it's crazy what it's like to be covered, right? Because I just knew I was walking, or I was gonna have to put in this insurance thing. It's crazy to understand what it's like just to know that you're covered and that the Lord has your back, and that whether he's an angel or whether he's just somebody who is drastically walking in the will of God, to understand what God says, stop and do this and talk to these people. And because he had no idea who I was. And you would think that me and him was having a conversation. Not to mention, after this whole conversation, we sat on the side of the road and he's like, can I just pray for you? Because I know you're a man of God. Promise you this happened. Promise you, outside, like on Bowling Air Force Base on the side of the road, dude's just sitting there. And it was an incredible experience for me. Like that, yeah. When does this happen? I mean, like, I'm not standing out here looking like a bum. I have on a suit and tie. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's just just sometimes sometimes God just sends a reminder like, you're covered. Doesn't mean that you purposely go out and not put gas in your car, because that's just dumb. But God knows me. He knows my tendencies. He knows my proclivities. He knows that, like, I'm running, and whatever's on my mind is on my mind. And some days I don't stop and do everyday stuff. And that, that's how I'm opening up the Elevation Podcast today. This is how we're going to get it going. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff. Let's do this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff, and I am here sitting with none other than my man, Pastor Frazier White. What's up, brother?
How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Yes, I'm good.
I'm excited about today because, a lot of times, first of all, it's the day after Martin Luther King, the observation of Martin Luther King. And one of the things that I always that is cool to talk about, and that I will eventually we'll get into is his what he was trying to do in economics, and how he was trying to change the community, when he actually was assassinated. And once you start to learn about that stuff about King, you start to understand where King's mind was once we got past the being able to drink from the same water fountain, because that part was in essence the easy part. That part was this just makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are dumb rules. Like, why is this happening? Why this doesn't make any sense? But then it became a part where there is a clutch that we want to have on a certain thing, that that they don't, they weren't trying to let go of.
Gotcha.
But it also, so we'll get to that eventually. But I want to know, I want to talk a little bit about you. Because my audience may not know who you are. And so we may not, they may not know, who you are, where you're from, what you do. So before I get into the depth of having these really cool conversations, I want to start there, just so we can sort of get acclimated with you. Who is you?
All right. I think I could do that.
Okay.
I am my wife would say, a Merlin boy. A product of two people got married in, I guess it was 67, something like that. Lionel and Cleo White, products of Washington, D.C. And as they got married, I'm the firstborn of their children. And but I grew up I'm a fourth generation, like, Pentecostal preacher. Although I never would have thought that that's what I would be if you asked me in high school. In high school, I said my goal, hopefully, is to maybe play drums for Essence. Somebody like that's what I thought. That's
Right.
where I thought I was going.
Yeah.
Church drummer growing up, but had that pocket
Right.
play and said that that's what I would be. And I was mentioning to you a while ago, went to Morgan State
Right.
in about 88 and thought maybe I'd be in TV, radio, doing sports, that kind of thing. But at that same time, I think I began to understand, I think it was 88, the summer of 89, that as a church boy, I got saved. And I got saved on Morton Street, right behind the Black Hole.
Wow.
And back in the day. It wasn't at a go-go, but I was around the corner from the Black Hole, and my parents were doing street ministry.
Right.
And
Black Holes, that was by Howard, right?
yeah,
Okay.
so that's Georgia Avenue,
Right.
right near like Park Road,
Gotcha.
Morton Street, and behind that is like a little cul-de-sac and a little public housing area there.
Okay.
And they were doing street ministry, and right when they were doing it, I was just helping my parents out. They needed somebody to help with equipment and stuff, so I was standing on the side, but I was seeing all of these people come to Christ, and they're like coming, and what I felt is that there's people who did not understand or hear this, and now upon hearing the word and hearing about God, they're coming towards him. And I'm realizing that I've been going away from him. And I realize I want that. So I got saved for real. And from that point, God started dealing with me about my purpose. And it's interesting that purpose is connected to where I met him then, which was on the street.
Right.
It's not in church. I'm a church boy, but that was not connected to my walk with Christ.
Wow.
My walk with Christ was connected to outside the church, on the street, and that's the DC I was called to. A lot of changes going on now, but that's the DC that really had me committed to what the flavor of ministry,
Right.
that's down in my DNA,
Right.
is. And so my mother was a pastor, and eventually I became pastor of the church she started.
Okay.
I became the pastor in 1996. So that means I've been pastoring for 20 something years.
4.
Yeah. 24. What is that in dog? You know how you say dog years? And
You don't want to know because that sounds 7. That's that's like 100 and that's you
Yeah.
you're the pastor at Faith Tabernacle
Correct.
over on
Faith
A Street,
Tabernacle, United Holy Church of America.
which is interesting because I got the pastor before you was James Love,
Yeah.
which I met you before.
Good folk.
Yeah, I met you before. You were
didn't-
pastor at Faith Tabernacle, and James Love he was just a close friend of our family. So I spoke at Faith Tabernacle.
Gotcha.
Before because we had no even though I'd done street stuff with you before. I I got an opportunity, so, and it was like, Pastor Frazier is taking over at Faith Tabernacle. I'm like, wow, the world is small. the
Wow.
world is small.
Wow.
We got I don't even remember how I say this every single show. I don't remember how we met, except for last week when it was Matt Anderson, because I knew exactly how me and Matt Anderson met on radio. But I say this all the time, like I don't remember. I remember the first show we did, the outreach that we did over in
Potomac
Gardens. But I don't remember. And then you did a whole bunch of stuff with my sister. Unrelated, once again, not knowing.
Didn't know exactly.
Not knowing
What?
that we were even related, which is so cool. Really?
Yeah, Pastor Pat Chin, right? So, and a matter of fact, I think it was through her that there was the connection for me with Christina.
Oh, really?
Still not knowing the connection with you.
Really?
And with Pastor Chin, because becoming pastor of Faith Tabernacle, got to know Pastor Chin, and so those connections, I didn't know how all these pieces were connected.
Right. Wow.
So it was like, okay.
Wow. Because interestingly enough, that when I think about you, I don't even think about any of that stuff. Because I don't have a correlation between. I don't think I've ever been in the same event with you and my sister or my aunt.
Yep.
Every event that we've done have been independent of.
There's 5 of me. Like 6. That's what I feel like sometimes, because sometimes these pieces don't connect.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Which is just super, super, super interesting. When we spoke about what you had going on at Faith Tabernacle, or what you was trying to accomplish there. The first thing that I thought to myself is, what is it that pushes you towards? Well, tell me a little bit about what it is you're trying to accomplish there. Then I really want to know what it is that pushes you towards that, because I think a lot of people might be interested in what it is that you're trying to do there with the program that you're starting there.
I would say our mission and the call is for us to be a witness on the hill.
Right.
That can't be hid. It just happens to be Capitol Hill, but there's a call for us to be a witness on the hill, into the city, and hopefully make an impact in the city. We're able to make an impact in the world.
Right.
By what we do in the city. So I think that also looks like us being able to reach those who are marginalized and left out with the good news. But also being innovative in how we do it, and also allowing our church to be a place for conversation. So there's a mixture of kind of the outright church we're called to be,
right?
But there's also the kind of house we're called to be in the city that has the issues that it has. And sometimes you got to have people come in the front door of the church. Sometimes you got to have them come on the side doors of the church.
Right.
Sometimes you got to invite them to the fellowship hall.
Right.
They're not going to go to the sanctuary.
Right. Absolutely.
So our fellowship right now, if you would ask me right now, a lot of my attention is on our fellowship hall.
Right.
And making our fellowship hall the place to be for conversations, whether it be about gentrification, displacement, homelessness, issues like that, to have a conversation with any and everybody. Not too long ago, we had one of our first conversations like that, and I was, some of the young adults in my church were trying to gauge me and see how I was going to react to this, because we had a conversation. I think there was a brother out of Philadelphia.
Really?
Who some years ago with I think a movement called Move.
I remember.
And police bombed and some different things, and the journalist who got jailed at that time, we had him as a central part of the conversation. Another group called Link Up had at our church, and
right.
so we're having a meeting there. Traffic that Link Up brings to the church, and
right.
we're there, and I'm hearing somebody behind me, and I hear a guy behind me talking, but of course, I turned around and it wasn't a guy. Let me take it back. It was a guy, but he didn't look like a guy when I turned.
Right.
And just that was a conversation with kind of people coming, wherever they're coming from, whatever their lifestyle was. And I think part of the challenge for the church is what it really means to have people come to your church. Wherever they are, whatever the situation is,
right.
And be able to have conversations, but be a light in the midst of that and represent Christ, sometimes in interesting dynamics.
Right.
So that's where we are right now.
All right, hold up. This is so unprofessional. Hold up.
You're good.
Woo! That was unprofessional. Sorry.
No, you're good.
This nigga cut off. I think that's important. How important is it to you? Like, there are a lot of places. There aren't a lot of places, I think, a lot of churches that you go to where the encouragement is on the conversation. I think that's unique. Most of the time, you go to church and you're listening. And I think that sort of gets the conversation piece sometimes becomes, I think becomes a bit political, because, who dictates what you talk about, or what your response is to conversation. Like, how important is it to have that openness, and what does that do? What does that do?
I'm a newcomer to the conversation, and conversation as ministry. So I think as a preacher and as a pastor, it can be challenging to have conversations.
Yeah.
And so often pastors don't have conversations. We preach. Other folk might have conversations, and we realize the conversations that people are having,
right,
as a result of what you're seeing.
Right.
But I think recently I've started to understand the power of listening. Listening is powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and it's challenging. But
that's interesting, because me and Matt Anderson just talked about this last week. Like, just last week, we talked about the power in listening. Like, literally just last week, like, if people hear each other, if people respect each other, it's a lot farther you can get in the kingdom of God when people listen to each other, versus me making an assumption about your life, to understand how what drives you, what and knowing, because if I'm listening to you, I'll be more apt to know where to take you to, Go ahead.
So this is the thing too, and that's in general. Listening is powerful.
Yeah.
It's even more crucial, as well as more challenging, for a leader to listen to followers, because you assume as a person in quote leadership,
right,
your job is to show and to tell.
Yeah.
But really, there's a power in a person in leadership and a dynamic of leadership where listening is how you lead better.
Right.
So I think that's crucial because often the presumption is, as a leader, I don't use my ears.
Right.
I use my mouth
Right.
and my vision and write it and make it clear. But sometimes I got to listen to people
Right.
who
Absolutely.
I think are following me, but there's so much that I'm actually gaining
Right.
from hearing God through the people He's calling me to lead.
Yeah. I think last week, not last week. This was a month ago. But anyway, when we spoke, I found it. This was a day I wanted you to come because your idea and what you were trying to build, as far as the prison, sort of. I don't want to say a prison ministry because that's wrong. Because it's more like a re-entry, more like a re-entry ministry. But I thought your idea was so in my lane. And I wanted to, and as we were talking before we went on air, I wanted to go into another sort of thought, but I wanted to start with you talking about what it is that you're doing for re-entry, because I think that is crucial, imperative.
I think,
and it's in my lane.
Well, and I think it's in. Most of us, it's in our lane because either we are returning citizens ourselves, our cousin is a returning citizen,
Right.
our father is a returning citizen,
Right.
our auntie could be a returning citizen.
Right.
So returning citizens is not a new concept for us, although we maybe historically have treated that's an element, even in church.
Right.
There's an element of, people who coming home from prison. Well, really, and we have often in the past treated people who are returning home from prison as the charity cases.
Right.
And,
Right.
what we got to do to, bring them up to snuff and take care of them. I think the turning point for me has been reimagining what, quote, prison ministry looks like.
Right.
And what ministry to people who are returning home looks like.
Right.
So here's one element that I think has blown my mind. And that is going back to listening. The role that the church plays in learning from our returning citizens, as well as the African American community, because one of the aspects that is a good lesson is entrepreneurship.
Right.
Because we've been working a dead end job for the past 20, 30 years.
Right.
And trying to help a returning citizen get in the job market and get in the entry level and get themselves together.
Right.
Come to find out, some returning citizens, even coming fresh out of prison, have a plan that exceeds our wildest imaginations because they already know I'm not getting that job because I have some strikes against me.
Right.
So instead of trying to work for somebody, I know I got to create and have a different mindset.
Right.
And so there's a perspective that the returning citizen, someone coming home from prison or incarceration,
Right.
has that is fresh eyes.
Right.
And they see the world in a different way. And that is almost, I think about somebody like Paul in the scriptures and realize that sometimes returning citizens are freer in their approach to life than those of us who've never been incarcerated.
Right.
Because we've been imprisoned by a system that they realize I can't even buy my way into. So instead of buying my way into that system, I'm creating something. I'm living outside of that matrix that now frees me from a lot of the process that y'all are stuck in. So when they come home from prison, we actually are needing to tap into, even if everybody's not going to be, I think we talked about this one time, even if everybody may not be a business owner, there's a entrepreneurial approach
Right.
that we got to have to life to not being stuck.
Right. Yeah, I think when we were having a conversation, and there were a lot of people I know, were in prison, went to prison, because they had an entrepreneurial mindset, which sometimes is just in your DNA. Um, but uh, without guidance, you will pick what you see. And there are a lot of different people who are incarcerated because of an entrepreneurial mindset with the wrong product. And you know what I mean? Like, whether it's somebody who's incarcerated for, kingpin status stuff, or somebody who's incarcerated for running guns, or somebody who's incarcerated for, selling, small amounts of drugs somewhere on a street corner. There's different levels to how big your entrepreneurial mindset is. But then if you are in an environment that doesn't give you access to understand how to take that mentality and apply it to a regular business, or you're just in an environment, that doesn't come out of you, then you end up incarcerated. You know what I mean? And so I think that a lot of times coming out of incarceration is wild, because people will inherently begin to try to systemize you. Like, they'll inherently be like, well, you can't get these jobs because blah, blah, blah. You just apply over here as a janitor, and, just apply and kind of make you feel like that is what the world has to be.
You preaching.
So I, like, there's hard to make.
And so let me
go ahead.
This concept, it just came to me recently.
Yeah.
And we think the imprisoned uniform is orange. An orange jumpsuit.
Right.
Is the imprisoned uniform.
Right.
It may be possible that sometimes the imprisoned uniform is a 3-piece suit. Because you're not always aware of the system that you're working for.
Right.
And there's some people who've never been incarcerated, or they don't think they've been incarcerated a day in their life.
Right.
But they are working for a system that they don't even understand.
Right. Yeah.
And they're cranking out what the system wants. And so I think it's interesting. I think about someone like Frances Cress Welsing, who talked about not only the system of racism and white supremacy, but she discussed how it's not really people that run the world, but organizations that run the world.
Right. Yeah,
and,
you're talking about that.
And the entrenchment of racism within organizations that really defines institutional racism. And so if we are really trying to help, or we define upward mobility by the role we play in these organizations, you got to then start asking yourself, well, what is the purpose and what's the mission of these institutions we're trying to be in? And do the purposes of these organizations and institutions work to liberate us, or do they become a more sophisticated and more plush means of our incarceration? Like you live in large, but you're still stuck.
Right. Right.
And so it's like saying, just what is the real reality, and how do I work? I'm not saying you need to bump America, anything like that. Not necessarily, but I am saying you need to be clearer,
right,
on what it is and what's the role that we play, especially as Christians.
Right.
Are we a product and are we a tool to the system and the state, or are we more like Moses, and do we hold the state accountable to a higher system? And if that's the case, you just have to be clear. I don't have to leave America. I don't have to leave maybe my job, but I need to remember or understand what is my role in this place.
Right.
That's
I'm with it. Man, there are so many there's so many directions to go with this particular conversation. But before we, so what is it? So with the program that you're starting, talk to me about the program because there's so many ways I can go with this conversation. I don't want to go way sidetracked because
clear way. Clear way is this.
Because there might be some people out here that want to be involved in the program, so I want to talk about it.
Yeah. So I would say this. Here's what we're looking at. That there's a need, and whether the funding comes from, our relationship with the city, DC, and and opportunities, but you have returning citizens, and not just returning citizens, but people in general.
Right.
But there is a particular niche of how you take a particular community and in entrepreneurial training and creating an entrepreneurial culture.
Right.
It ranges from kind of entrepreneurial conversations.
Right.
That encourage people to be entrepreneurial, and it ranges from that end of the spectrum to an actual programmatic approach.
Okay.
To say, how do we provide skills and developmental opportunities for either people who want to delve into, like, what is something in me that could become a means for me.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Like how do you take? If I think back and say, okay, when I was younger and my son was, doing video games and everything, somebody like Tony Hawk, who's a skateboarder,
right?
He rides a skateboard, and that becomes the means of kind of. Does he have? I don't know if he has an empire now. Would that be considered empire?
But yeah, he had a whole game.
so it's just understanding that.
Yeah.
If you understand your niche.
Yeah.
Understanding your niche gives you the ability. If you know who you are, especially
Absolutely.
if you ever know who God made you.
Absolutely.
There's no way you're subject to be kind of about, can I get some overtime?
Right.
No, we're not. Overtime is not going to get us where we need to go.
Right. That's a very interesting conversation because there are inherently, when I think about Christian businesses or what does it mean to be a Christian in business, and if I'm bringing somebody on and I'm trying to teach somebody about that's coming out of the system, and I sit beside that person, it's like, what does it mean to be a Christian in business, right? And it's like the first thing I've got to teach you about is integrity, right? And it's so many times that we can't separate what it means to run after your goals and your visions from what it means to be an opportunist. And it's like there is business, and then there's opportunist. And so and sometimes you can't tell the difference. Like somebody with a vision, people with vision win. People with opportunities get money real quick. You know what I'm saying? And I think that when you're talking about people that come from the system with the entrepreneurial mindset,
we almost park right here.
Like when you come from the system, when you come out of the system, when you come from incarceration with the entrepreneurial mindset, right? The first thing you do is start to search for what it is. If you're going to be a Christian and guide them in the world of entrepreneurship or business, the first thing you want to start is with who are you? Like, who are you? What do you bring to the table? What do you love? What were you called to do? Because if you start with that, you have a passion for the business versus saying, what can you sell? This is what's selling right now. Let's go set up a shop selling. What's like the newest thing is like anything made from marijuana or CBD or this is like this new phase. Before it was vaping. It was vape, and it's like it becomes like this opportunist, and that becomes the definition of what it means to be a business owner, but that's what you had in the streets. You had people with entrepreneurial mindsets, and then we're given crack.
So, just take our history, right? And just take that from the first ship and the ship that we came over here on, which represents a business,
Yes.
which represents a corporation and corporate backing.
Absolutely.
So when you take that understanding, then our engagement with business from the beginning has been treacherous. And so there often then has not been a connection in correlating ethics and business together, because our history says they don't go together,
Absolutely.
because it always have been connected to by any means necessary.
Right.
So when you start talking about from the kingdom perspective or Christianity, then it is saying that's different than the corporate history of America.
Right.
That when you start talking about Christian, you're talking about a higher ethic that is, like you said, connected to purpose. So I think
Right.
that it is crucial for, almost everybody that's within this context to reimagine and re-understand, either from a biblical or a spiritual perspective, what is spiritual first, and then how that manifests in something like business. Because something you said a minute ago was connected to both the entrepreneurial ability that is in people and also just the leadership ability that is in people, that often is tainted,
Right.
and taken a wrong direction.
Absolutely.
And now we're recapturing that with just the opportunity to retrain.
Right. It just, and I think that's a wonderful point, because if you take a person, I think you start. I think from a spiritual point of view, with understanding that everybody's not entrepreneurial, but there are a bunch of entrepreneurial people, but the core of who you are the core of what you do should surround who you are. The core of what you do should surround who you are, instead of we becoming what we do. And I think that there are so many people that become what we do, and what we do is dictated by by markets, or by what's hot right now, or by what's and it's always and it's funny because there is always an original, and then there is always an opportunist. And so
Opportunist.
because for instance, I remember back in the day I used to listen to, let's say, Missy Elliott and Timberland, right? And Timberland had this sound.
Okay.
These drums that he, because you're a drummer, I'm gonna say Timberland, because all the drummers know that's the and that beat that Timberland used to have. And what you heard after that was everything sound just like Timberland, because the corporations, the businesses were like, oh, that's working, everybody do that, or you can't work. And you find that people who are working are generally working for a machine that's sort of emulating everything else that is out. But Timberland, and the reason that he's still here and he's still around, is because the core of who he was in the music, and not him doing what was hot.
Got it.
You know what I'm saying? That's where
powerful.
and that's where I think we are if we're gonna bring somebody from from being incarcerated and say, hey, don't just hand them. Well, you should sell these cars, unless the person is passionate. So the first thing you do is you get down into understanding who that person is. And so I think that's a wonderful place to be at.
Gotcha.
All right, so if we're man, I want to move to this thing. So if we're there's so many different directions. I'm not trying to get too off. I don't mind getting off a little bit. I wrote this. I was reading the paper. When I say paper, it wasn't actually a paper. But on CNN, I was looking at Michael Bloomberg. And as we talk about the culture, as we talk about, this is just the day after Martin Luther King. I was looking at Michael Bloomberg, who is gazillionaire, right? He's worth, last time I checked, probably 60 bill. And he this weekend he had a really interesting initiative that he was interested in bringing forth. He called and he said it in the context of Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We made this announcement about the Greenwood Initiative, right? And basically, he putting $70 billion into the African American community, and by in the next decade or whatever, the wealth of the African American community would triple. So when you're looking at that, my question, look, I can tell you already you're aching on this, because anybody who doesn't know what Greenwood, actually, you know what? I'm not explaining to y'all what Greenwood is. Google it. Google the Black Wall Street, but that was Tulsa, Oklahoma. What are when someone thinks that is simply the way to solve the African American for lack of better terms, condition. What is from a ministry point of view, like for African American point of view, from someone who's looking to go into, what does that say to you?
I think one of the, even when people are good intentioned, I say quote good intentioned,
which Michael Bloomberg may not be. Go ahead.
Yes. So even when you give them a pass and say good intention,
right,
or you don't have time to get into figuring out whether people are good intention. Like I've learned since my oldest son, when he was young, all teachers, especially male teachers, are suspect until proven otherwise. So taking that same, because especially with black folk, we have a hermeneutic of suspicion. There's a way we interpret everything.
That was a preacher / PhD studier word, a hermeneutic precondition. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I would say then my interpretation then of, let's say, of Michael Bloomberg's approach, because it's interesting even in talking about Greenwood. So from 1992 to 1994, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I went to Oral Roberts University.
Oh, really?
And so what was interesting is that I was ignorant about Greenwood until I went to Tulsa for ministry.
Right.
And kind of mega church charismatic movement influx. That's what brought me
the early
But
mid-90s.
when I got to Tulsa and understand what Tulsa was, it's interesting, this dynamic of this mix between that movement and this history. Because what it does is it does show you the cognitive dissonance that exists within the church, within America. So Tulsa is an interesting place.
That's interesting.
To just highlight that split. Even the way Tulsa operates, you have North Tulsa and South Tulsa. Clear. Projects are in North Tulsa. The Christian movement, especially in that day, is in South Tulsa. So you've got this history of Greenwood and all of this rich history of what Black Wall Street and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
That's lumped in this perception of who we are.
Right.
And what you need to throw at us to kind of help us understand, when really it's not really understanding the dynamics of issues like oppression and systematic structures. Not that we need someone, okay, let me teach you how to do. No, it's really, I just need you to get your foot off of me. If you just get your foot off of me.
If you can just chill and give me a chance. Yeah.
And then that would free me up to operate. And so I think, but I think the cognitive dissonance is an example of a way we approach things that causes us not to really, there's conflicts even when in the church. So when you ask me about, okay, hearing Michael Bloomberg's approach or answer to something, I think it goes back to listening. I think it goes back to saying, do we even understand what the problem is? Or when we come to the table, are we even speaking the same language?
Right.
So when we say, what is the answer? No, we haven't even sat down long enough to discuss, okay, what is the problem?
What is the problem? And I think that even with there are some times where you take a complicated problem and you give it a simple answer, and not
Because that's the word that came to my mind. The first word that came to my mind is simplistic.
right. And you don't understand how complex this issue actually is. It's not simply about, it's not just simply financial or it's not just simply economic. It is far bigger than just being an economic issue. There are a whole bunch of other issues layered under that.
That's a good word too. Layered.
Yeah, it's like an onion. You can get rid of the economic issue. And there's a lot that will be accomplished with getting rid of the overall economic issue. But you have to respect where the economic issues actually came from. And the economic issues didn't come from economics. The economic issues came from race. And it's like, you got to understand where they came from. They didn't come from, bad handling of money. They came from redlining. They came from, you know what I'm saying? They didn't come just from, no, it came from boxing certain groups of people out. And so, and then leaving them boxed out, and then saying it's their fault that they're boxed out. And so then they believe you when you say that their fault that they're boxed out. So they're trying to figure out how is that their fault that they're boxed out. So they're trying to, figure this whole world out. So it becomes just really, really complicated, really, really, while dealing with things like police brutality, while dealing with things like, being in the hood.
Hold on. So I'm there, but I think about a year, maybe 2 years ago, here's what I started thinking about, because we are, this is an intellectual, we're intellectual people. This is America.
I feel honored sitting here having an intellectual conversation with a PhD.
On the way.
On the way.
On the way.
Good enough. Good enough.
Just about that. Dissertation.
It's not an honorary, is it?
No, it's not.
Okay, that's all that matters.
Believe me, my wife will tell you, it is not honorary.
Because some people pay that $35 to get that honorary doctor's degree and then call themselves doctor.
I understand it. Sometimes I wish I went that way. But so check this out. We're an intellectual culture.
Right.
And so Roots, the miniseries, came out in 1970. I don't know if it was 76. I'm not sure. Hey, y'all, Google that. But here's what I would say. And I had to be in third grade. My understanding is that people returned to work after that miniseries. People were, coming up to African Americans and kind of apologizing and saying, I'm so sorry.
Right.
And Roots is documented that Roots has been a trailblazer in how it opened the eyes of people to understand the story, right? The narrative of African Americans. It's gobbledygook. It's hogwash. Want to know why I say that?
Say that word again. I just did it.
Gobbledygook.
Sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
Because it's African Americans who was an outlaw for them to learn how to read.
Right.
It's African Americans who were blocked in terms of understanding their history. So how can a culture and a people in the land that enslaved people, in a land that oppressed people, how could it be that it took a miniseries for you to know what happened in the country you're from?
Well, that's...
How could that be? How could you not know unless there is a thing called privilege that systematically reinforces ignorance, willful ignorance, so that you are, and it goes back to cognitive I'm about to get upset. So cognitive dissonance is a real thing,
uh huh.
and it's a manifestation of trying to not know what you know, so that you won't feel bad about what you should feel bad about.
Right. I think when you erase the memory of your own evil and you rewrite it, you rewrite the entire memory of your entire, because if you tell a part of the story, you kind of got to tell the whole thing. And if I tell the whole thing, I got to remind myself
Yes.
of where I came from and how bad it really was, how dark it really is. And I think that there is a harsh reminder about how bad things are. And so what we do is we wash it away. And that way, because I was listening to God, I forgot her name, the lady that does the blue-eyed, brown-eyed thing.
Yes.
And it's so interesting to listen to her talk, where she says we have taught ourselves. We had, like I was telling you before this, like, February, I'm doing a love month. I'm not doing Black History.
Yes.
Because we've taught ourselves that, we can just appreciate the Black people on this sprinkle of the day. But for the most part, white people were all the generals, and we were, they were all the heroes and the inventors and everything came from one culture, didn't come from the other one. And so it was like we could almost make the history sort of disappear.
Yes.
And I think that's what's happening. Like you see people, it's hard to wake up. It's hard to wake up from that and be reminded, because you don't want to be reminded. And why would you anyway? It's hard to wake up, to come back from that particular thing. And so, man, listen.
Well,
That's how the conversation goes sideways.
So now let me say this though, but that's the conversation that leads to another conversation, and the conversation that leads to, especially from a kingdom of God standpoint, that's a conversation that leads to, well, then what is the answer? And because going down that road, when I make a left from there, it's just despair. That's where I'm going from there, despair.
Right.
However, I think that the opportunity that exists for us is, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And so the opportunity is, so what is the kingdom approach to all of this? And I do believe that some of the answer is in recapturing an understanding of not only the kingdom of God and recapturing who the church is called to be, and how that also connects with how does the kingdom of God influence, and how does the church, who represents the kingdom of God, how are we called to minister in a marketplace? How are we called to influence the same organizations that Francis Cress Welsing says, it's just institutional racism. But racism is just a manifestation of the spiritual dynamics of evil that exists. So if that is the case, then is the church called to simply be a tool for that structure, which the church in America has been in the past? Or is the church called to be Moses, to now be a opportunity to influence and change our world? And so I think the word that comes to my mind is this is a game-changing moment. Not only in terms of thinking about people like returning citizens and the opportunity for the church to not just welcome returning citizens, but also be empowering to and be empowered by returning citizens, but also the role of the church to be game changers, to be innovative and God-led, to really, I won't say spark movement, but to be really connected, because the issues that we're talking about can't be, what Black people are talking about.
Right.
This is a kingdom issue, and the kingdom issue is involving everybody.
Right.
So if If it's an issue of brown people and immigration issues, that's a kingdom issue.
Right.
It's an issue with returning citizens. That's a kingdom issue.
Absolutely.
It's not a black people issue.
Absolutely.
And so it's really saying, it's for me. So those are the conversations. The conversations are related to, we're I wish I had the date together, but there's a church our church, Faith Tabernacle, has been praying with, mostly Caucasian church, not all, but predominantly church Caucasian membership. But we've been in partnership and been praying and doing some things, and we realized we need to have a joint conversation
Absolutely.
about gentrification. We need to have a real conversation about that. Sitting next to each other in pastoral meetings is a pastor who gentrification is the means for their church's demise. Sitting next to a pastor that gentrification is the means for the uprise.
Yep. And I think that
Sitting next to each other.
and there is no easy answer to, like especially something like gentrification. There is no easy answer to it because it's an economic thing, right? So there is the ground level answer to it. No, not answer, but there's a ground level like, listen, if you live in this hood, let's start buying it. Let's start owning it. As one people, there's one conversation, right? Because they can't gentrify what they don't own, right? Another conversation is the other. It's from the top down. It's like, bring us to the table while you're bringing this to the table, and let's make a community out of all this.
Yes.
And so but then it's more complicated than that because of how much money it is in it. The money is always about the money, how much money it is in it. And it's hard to bring someone who has no money to the table with someone who does have money. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm coming with the with billions of dollars here.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? If I'm coming with billions of dollars here, then I don't even want to sit at the table with you. And so, you know what I'm saying? Like,
you had, and the fact that you have, like you just said, this is a conversation where you're talking about the government.
Yes.
You're talking about private industry. You're talking about the church. You're talking about community. And so in all of that is understanding, like, what are the perspectives of all of these. But the bottom line is that if you take a city like D.C., the developer owns the city.
Absolutely.
And if the developer owns the city, it means the developer owns the government. But government's role is actually supposed to be not private industry. So private industry is about profit. Government is really not supposed to be about profit because the government represents the people.
Supposedly.
But when the government is really led by private industry,
yes,
the government does not work in the interest of the people. And when that is the case, then the question we have to ask as the church is, does the private industry also own the church?
Hold up. That is a total side conversation. No. I'm saying it's one of those conversations that go, and I'm not even getting into that because that's if I go that far, we'll be on here for another hour.
Yeah. I got you. I'm sorry.
All right, so there are two questions I want to ask you before we roll out of here.
Okay.
Because these conversations go on forever. First, I ask everybody the same question every week. Give me the one thing about the world. Give me the one thing about the world that you would change if God gave you the grace to make one change. What do you think would be the most effective thing you can do if you had the grace to do one thing and to completely flip?
To speak straight into the heart of every hurting person.
God, that was a good answer. That was a good answer. Yeah, you can just so I got oh yeah, that was deep. All right, there's one more thing I gotta do. That was deep. That was a wild moment. So every week on the Elevation podcast, I always do something. It's just kind of it's my thing that I do. Hold up. All right, so everybody that comes on here rolls out with a little something from my company.
Okay. All right.
And you gotta open that thing. There's people watching.
Yeah. Yes.
Interesting. You already ran that color.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I can rock this. I can put it on there, right?
You can.
Okay.
That's what's up. Man, I appreciate you for coming, man. And this has been a definitely a great enlightening moment. And I think that it's been a lot of value to the people that watch. And
it's all mine. The pleasure's been mine. I appreciate you, and I appreciate when we first met. I don't think we first met when you came to Potomac Gardens,
right?
But that was the context of gathering. Mm-hmm. But man, I just appreciate what I saw in you. And I think I mentioned this to you too. So whenever that was, and that was like about 2004, something like that. So from there to now, to see, and you were grown then.
Yeah.
But there's a different kind of grown now. And so to see what God is doing, it's not that he wasn't already doing that. It was already done then. But to see the manifestation of a clearer kingdom of God impact is just encouraging. And I think that there's no limit on the impact now. And I don't think any limitation that either you might have put on yourself or any limitation that anybody else has put on you can withstand. You know how the scripture says, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. Not so much that they're coming, but they won't be able to withstand how God comes. They won't prevail.
Right.
They'll fall down. So any limitation will fall compared to what God is up to in your life. So I'm thankful for just getting that glimpse. And I don't even know everything about you, but I know just, how God set up that I didn't know who your sister was.
Right.
I didn't know who your aunt was.
Right.
So I didn't, all these pieces, God sometimes allows people to see a perspective and get a glimpse here 20 years later, then get a glimpse here to show how great God is.
Yeah, absolutely.
God is good.
Man, is he? Man, listen, thank you so much, man. Listen, thank you all for joining us here at the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff. Y'all, if you didn't watch this whole thing all the way through, man, you got to go to ShawnRiffRaff.com and really watch that. Play that back because this has definitely been a very enlightening, and just enlightening venture today. Once again, this is the Elevation Podcast. Join me here every Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. I try to keep it at an hour. Sometimes, man, it just gets good. So sorry. Every Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. right here on either Facebook, YouTube, ShawnRiffRaff.com, wherever you watch it. All right. Thank y'all very much. Peace out.